our series, Forgotten Metaphors. It's week 3. We talked about shepherding, about the fact that, we know what shepherding is, but in Scripture at times, those people would understand that shepherding is an act of love. And so when God calls himself the Good Shepherd, it is a declaration of how much and the manner in which he loves us, more than we understand today. That's why we looked at it, that God loves us in a personal, special way that we just we don't get so much today. We don't understand it as well. Then last week, we looked at the harvest. We looked at, the way that the food is grown and the process of being a farmer. And we talked about that. And we talked about, the patience, right, and the focus that requires, that maybe is missed on us because not many of us are in the farming industry. But God has that kind of focus, and he really expects it from us. Expects us to be patient. And he is so patient with us. This week, we're not going to look at a person, as we have the 2 weeks. We're actually going to look at a thing. We're going to look at a product, honey. When God describes the promised land, he calls it a land filled with milk and honey, or flowing with milk and honey. We're going to look at honey, the honey side of it. There are 60 mentions in Scripture of bees or honey in the Bible. Now, I don't know what you know personally about apiology, which is the scientific study of honeybees, but I'm sure you know that bees make honey, right? That's kind of what they do. The Bible describes honey as being provided by God. Okay, so I want you to understand the conflict there a little bit, that we know scientifically that bees make honey. When the Bible talks about honey, he's saying God provides honey. So that means something. We'll look into it a little bit. But in Exodus chapter 16, as the Hebrew people, they're walking through the desert, right? They've left Egypt as slaves. They're out in the desert. They're crying out for food, and God provides it, right? And it literally just fell to the ground in the morning. There it is, right? Well, here's what it says in verse 31. The house of Israel called its name manna, and it was like white coriander seed, and the taste of it was like wafers made with honey. And what I want you to understand, think about that manna. It's literally just food that falls from the sky because God wants to give it to you, because God cares about your needs, because God has you on a path that doesn't seem to provide. So he just makes this magical thing happen, and it tastes like honey. Okay? That's a beautiful thing, but that illustrates that God's providing this. We know that bees make it, but God's providing it. Now, the first time we actually hear about honey is in Exodus chapter 3, verses 1 through 8. So I'm going to read those for us today. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro. See there? He's a shepherd. He was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, who was also the priest of Midian. And he led the flock to the back of the desert and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire from the midst of a bush. So he looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire, but the bush was not consumed. Then Moses said, I will now turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush does not burn. So when the Lord saw that he turned aside to look, God called to him from the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here I am. Then he said, Do not draw near this place. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place where you stand is holy ground. Moreover, he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look upon God. And the Lord said, I have surely seen the oppression of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters, for I know their sorrows. So I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up from that land to a good and large land, to a land flowing with milk and honey. There it is. There's the promised land. It is important to recognize the cause and effect in this issue. God points out the slavery in Egypt. He says, I know they're oppressed by their taskmasters. I know this. And for this reason, because they've cried out for the way they've been treated, I have come. For this reason. That's the cause. What I'm doing now is the effect. I have come. I have a plan. And here's my promise. You're going to go somewhere else. A land of milk and honey. They're in a desert land. Egypt is not, it's a desert. And they're crammed in a tiny space. That's their living quarters, all slaves. That you never, if you have a slave, you never give them a big old bedroom or a big old house or whatever. You just give them the minimum that they can survive in. And really, if you have enough slaves, you don't worry about if they survive. It's a cost equation. Like if I make it smaller, some of them will die, but I don't have to pay for more housing, so it works out. And that's where they were. They were crammed in this horrible place. And so God came to earth to respond to their need, and his response, his plan, his promise, he says is a good land. And he says, but it's big, and it's open, and it's flowing with milk and honey. Now, some scholars today will say that they think that milk may have actually been the rarest commodity back then in this land, because we're talking about a desert land, which by definition means water is scarce, right? I mean, that's all it takes. Sand will happen, okay? If you don't have water, you'll get sand eventually. Like, that's where it goes to. So just a lack of water creates a desert. No water. Milk never exists before there is water, okay? That's just a fact. So therefore, it has to be more scarce than the water is. Milk requires healthy livestock to provide it. You can get milk from, as the movie said, anything with nipples, but any female with, I'd never mind. You can get milk from any, but you need livestock. You need something that provides milk, okay? And so that thing, that animal, is going to require water itself, right? And then also it needs food, like grass and foliage. Two other things, grass and foliage require more water, right? That only happens with water. They also need room to grow. They need physical space. And then so you're there, you've got all those things, you got these animals. Well, you need some protein, you need some meat yourself, so you're probably going to eat some of those animals. So you need enough animals that you can eat some and still have others to give you milk, right? So all those factors pile up to make milk rare. And rare always means valuable. That is supply and demand. That is the basics of economics. Rare means valuable. God is promising them health, comfort, and also basically when he says milk and honey, he's kind of saying riches, because they're going to have these things that are incredibly valuable. He's promised them milk, but then he adds to the promise honey, right? And that's what we're going to focus on today. We're going to just the honey aspect. I've said enough about milk. We're good. I said bees make honey, and you probably know that. You probably know they make it by regurgitating, right? They eat. They get the. Well, okay. I don't get to talk about puke very often in a sermon, so I'm just gonna sit here for a second. They suck nectar out of the flowers. That's their food. They get back to the hive. They regurgitate it back, and then they or other bees eat it again and regurgitate. And that process of puking is what makes honey. Isn't that delicious? Don't you just want that in your bowl of cereal this morning? But that's okay. So that's how honey is happening, right? But flowers that they need. That's where they get the nectar, right? Flowers are rare in the desert. That's the whole thing. They're also rare in grazing fields because livestock eat grass and plants and flowers. And so if you've got this livestock, they're going to eat that stuff. For a plant to grow large enough to flower, it requires it not to be eaten. So from this desert land, God is moving them to a land where there is grass and space and livestock can eat and be healthy and produce milk. And on top of that, there's enough foliage left over that bees can make honey. So much so that the land flows with it. Get this, 1 pound of honey, 1 pound, just a pound, which will last a family a good long time. I mean, that's more than one honey bear, right? 1 pound of honey requires 2 million flowers. Think about that. 2 million flowers in the desert. Where are you going to find it? A land flowing with honey takes a lot of pounds of honey. Okay? God is making a huge, huge promise. He is promising abundance. I mean, milk, honey, land, water, life. Jesus said in John 10:10, The thief does not come except to steal and to kill and to destroy. I have come that they may have life and that they may have it more abundantly. That is his plan. Honey was a symbol of a healthy land. In fact, back in Genesis, when Joseph, that's Donny Osmond as Joseph in the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. So, but you know the story of Joseph, right? So he's sold into slavery by his brothers. And then he's working as a slave. He gets thrown into prison. Then becomes a second in command, only to Pharaoh in Egypt. So it's an awesome story. Requires a lot more time than I just gave it. But there it is. And then a huge famine comes to the land all over, not just Egypt, but the surrounding lands. And Joseph's father, Israel, who believes Joseph is dead, sends some of his brothers to Egypt to beg and barter for food, because he hears that Egypt has food, which is true, because Joseph has collected this food. So here's what it says in Genesis 43, verse 11. Then their father Israel said to them, "If it must be so, then do this. Take some of the best products of the land in your bags and carry down to the man." They don't know it's his son Joseph. "Carry down to the man as a present a little balm and a little honey, aromatic gum and myrrh, pistachio nuts and almonds." He says, take him this gift, and one of the things he includes is honey. He wants to show that they're not lazy. He wants to show that they're generally not poor. He wants to show that they have honey. Because if you've got honey, that means that generally you're well fed, because it's an abundance thing. You don't have honey unless everything else is going okay. And so he says, it's very common. I'll tell you, people try to save face when they're in need. People come in years of ministry. All the time, people have asked me for things when they are in need, which is great. I mean, that's kind of the point. It's part of it anyway. And so they come, but it's very often they talk about how things usually are. They'll tell you, I hate to ask for this. I normally wouldn't need help, or I used to have, and they fill in and they explain. They're trying to justify not that they deserve this thing, but that that the circumstances taking them here. And this is what Israel's doing. Okay, I want them to know that we're not just some bums. We're not just we haven't done, but we're just in bad luck right now. And so what he says, the thing that is going to show them is if we take honey. Because honey shows wealth and blessing and abundance. So I'm using all this to illustrate that when God's promise in the promised land, it was huge. It was rich, flowing. I mean, we can't imagine. I mean, we wouldn't want a land flowing with milk and honey because that's gross, okay? It's wet and then it's sticky. Like, what are we going to do? Okay? But to understand the amount, the promise is huge. So in the book that I've been using for this series, Scouting the Divine, Margaret Feinberg speaks with a beekeeper. This guy was a commercial beekeeper. He had over 3,000 hives with over 70,000 bees in each one. So that's a quarter of a billion bees. I said 2 million flowers. It's Big Number Sunday. Quarter of a billion bees. Speaking of big numbers, let's take another offering. That was not in my notes. I'm feeling good. Okay. All right. So they got all these bees. So he talked to Feinberg about the science of bees. He talked about all the different roles they play. Better yet, the jobs that they do in the hive. I don't know what you know. You know the queen, right? There's the queen, there's the worker bees, and the drones. And the worker bees are really the impressive ones because they have a multitude of jobs. There are nursery workers who take care of baby bees. There are undertakers who literally carry dead bees out of the hive. They have architects who build honeycomb and the hive itself. They have guards who work the door and fight off intruders. They literally, like a bee from another hive can't fly in, the guards will fight them. But they know their own bees, and they don't. Anyway. There are foragers. Those are the ones that we're going to run into in life. We've seen them because they fly literally hundreds of miles a day, back and forth, collecting nectar and bringing it back to the hive for the honey maker to eat and puke the nectar into honey, right? That's the process. And they'll fly as far as 3 miles away from the hive, find a flower, fill up, fly back, get rid of it, and go. All day, hundreds of miles in a day. And what that tells me, that we said, okay, we know bees make honey, but God provides honey. Well, God's blessing requires us to work as one. You hear that? When he says, I provide honey, he's talking about all these things. 70,000 bees in a hive. They've all got jobs. And every one of them is necessary, very necessary, completely instrumental. I mean, can you imagine if they just, some bees only live a few weeks or less in a natural lifespan, just the way they work. And so if 70,000 bees, some are dying pretty quickly. What if just the underkeeper bee said, you know what, I'm just going to go find some nectar and hang out? The hive would be blocked. It'd be full of dead bees. And then it would be infected with disease. All kinds of horrible things happen if just one guy doesn't do his job. So what a beehive needs is it's called hive mentality, right? We all think with one goal. And God's blessing requires us to work as one. I mean, maybe you think of yourself as not very important. Maybe your job, maybe your physical job, like where you work Monday through Friday or whatever days you work, maybe it seems trivial to the world. Let me tell you, I've known people in almost every line of work that have felt that way. I've known financial executives, lawyers that felt like my job's not that important. Some of us have jobs, when I was working at Bed Bath & Beyond, stacking towels on the shelves, I didn't feel very important, but I certainly would have traded to be a lawyer or some financial executive, right? But the truth is, everyone seems like we get there. We have that feeling sometimes, but every job in the hive needs to get done. Imagine if no bees fed the babies, right? Imagine if no bees flap their wings. This is amazing. Some of the drone bees, their job is to flap their wings. Okay? In the wintertime, they have a plan. They huddle up in there. They don't leave, okay? They just get inside, they huddle up, and the ones on the outside flap their wings to keep themselves warm enough to not freeze to death. And then they just take shifts and fly in and out. Okay? That's what they do. In the summertime, when it gets too hot, they go and they drink water. They come in, they lay the water in front of them, they flap their wings on. That's air conditioning. Their job is to flap their wings. And if they just quit doing their job, which seems dumb, right? What's your job? I'm a wing flapper. Like, that's not, you don't need business cards. Like, if you're a wing flapper. But nonetheless, if they stopped, no honey. That's what it is. If they didn't do their job, there's no honey. How much more do you think God is counting on you, on your contribution to bring His glory to the world? When I was working at Bed Bath & Beyond, there were no lawyers coming down into the basement to talk to the packing crew. There were no financial executives heading down there to say, let me tell you about how God can bless you in your life. The only people down there were the people that worked there. And so I was as important in that regard as anyone else could have been. But I was the one that had access. The Bible says, in our weakness, He is made strong. That means unity. That means partnership. God values teamwork. 1 Corinthians 12 says there are many parts, but one body. You get that? It's talking about all the different things in the church, all the different jobs in the kingdom, many parts, but one body. Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verses 9 through 12. It says, 2 are better than one because they have a good reward for their labor. For if they fall, one will lift up his companion. But woe to him who is alone when he falls, for he has no one to help him up. Again, if 2 lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one be warm alone? Though one may be overpowered by another, 2 can withstand him, and a 3-fold cord is not quickly broken. There is I learned about this. It's a certain type of bee. They're Asian bees. You see, that's a hand in the back behind those. I'll be honest with you, these are not Asian bees. These are hornets or something. There's something worse, but that picture freaked me out. I had to show it to you. Anyway, there's a certain type of Asian bees that their body temperature is higher than most of the other insects around them. And so when wasps come in, the wasp's body temperature is much lower. So these bees, their fighting tactic, they don't sting them. They don't do it. They surround them. They hug them, basically. They kill them with kindness. They take their hot bodies and get on these wasps that are colder, and they heat them up till the wasp just passes out. It gets overheated. That's what they do. They kill him with kindness. But one hot little bee will never do that. It takes the group. Jesus prayed for us that God would make us one, as the Son and the Father are one. That's how you kill these giant wasp things. There are two proverbs that I want to share with you talk about honey. Proverbs 16:24. It says, "Pleasant words are a honeycomb, sweetness to the soul, and health to the bones." Honeycomb. Pleasant words are filled with honey. Honey is provided by God. It is a blessing of richness. God's blessing in words, just words. Sweetness to the soul and health to the bones. I spoke a few weeks ago and mentioned the passage in Hosea 13:6 that says, "When I fed them, they were satisfied. When they were satisfied, they became proud. Then they forgot me." Do you remember that? We talked about it a few weeks ago. Well, hear this. This is Proverbs 27:7. "A satisfied soul loathes or hates the honeycomb. But to a hungry soul, every bitter thing is sweet." Think about that. God said, I supplied their need to the point they were satisfied. And when they were satisfied, they became proud. And when they became proud, they forgot me. And that's what the proverb says, man. Once you're full to the max, you don't even care anymore. Have you ever had a huge meal to the point and you just stuff yourself and there's some left and you look at it and go, I don't want to look at that. No, don't. Take it away. I don't want to see it. That's what this is. When you get filled to the max, you can get to the point where you just don't even want it anymore. And God's blessing can be that sometimes. God's blessing can be to the point that we just ignore it. We take it for granted. We forget about it. We very well may be in an age at least in our society, we've been blessed. We've come to the point that we hate the gifts of God. Probably none of us, but our society. We loathe what God provides. And right now in other parts of the world, in South America, in Africa, in Asia, Christianity is growing at an incredible rate. A hungry soul, every bitter thing is sweet. These parts of the world are impoverished. I mean, they're poor. They have not been blessed with the bounty or the stuff that we have, and their hunger is for God. Now we can absolutely take away from this that God values teamwork. He wants us to live sacrificially. He wants us to work for the good of our brothers and sisters. He wants us to advance His kingdom. I'm not in any way bashful or ashamed to tell you that that's true. It's true. But God doesn't call us to be bees. He doesn't tell us to be like bees at all. The metaphor that we're talking about is simply about God providing honey. So what we need to grasp this morning is that God provides more than enough. We just need to understand the depth. God provides extravagantly. He promises it. He promises to provide. Jesus said to the disciples, if it were not so, I would have told you. People and pastors have talked about the economy of God or God's storehouses. If you've heard anyone talk about that, God has wealth that we cannot imagine. And He gives out that wealth. He gives out of that wealth. But nothing will ever demonstrate the abundance that God is willing to give than a simple verse that we all know. For God so loved the world that He gave His one and only Son to die on a cross. I'll add that in. Whoever believes in Him shall not perish, but will have everlasting life. God provides extravagantly. You understand that Jesus' death was enough to pay for the sins of every person in all of existence, and yet He gave it for you? That's giving in abundance. You understand that? Jesus, when he let Him nail Him up there, when He carried that cross, when He wanted down, He stopped Himself and thought about me. He thought about you. He knew what a mess I was going to make of this life. He knew how you were going to screw it up. He said, someone's got to do this for them. And so he gave abundantly. When you wonder or you doubt if God can provide, remember the cross. When you find yourself in a circumstance where, I don't know how this is going to get done, or I don't know where we're going to find the money. I don't know if God can do this. Think of the cross. He provides extravagantly. He blesses with more than enough. God promises a land flowing with milk and honey. Extravagant blessing for all of us. If we will just follow. See, we have to follow his lead to the promised land. They walked for 40 years in there. And some of it was lengthened because of their own mess and their stumble. But he said, I'm going to provide for you. He said, just come this way. He wants to bless every one of us. He's ready. He can afford it. He loves to do it. We just have to follow.